Good afternoon and welcome to today's press conference with Swedish Minister for Foreign Affairs Tobias Billström and Latvian Minister for Foreign Affairs Krišjānis Kariņš. The press conference will be available on the Swedish government's website, government.se.
So, very welcome everybody to this press conference, and dear Minister, dear Krišjānis, thank you very much for coming to Sweden and for important discussions on the security of our region and our unwavering support for Ukraine for as long as it takes. Relations between our countries are excellent. Our cooperation is broad and deep. We are strong partners in the region, in the EU, in the UN, and soon also we will be allies in NATO. And both Sweden and Latvia have supported and worked for the historic decision last week by the European Council to open accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. And the decision shows how far Ukraine has come in its EU integration since the Ukrainian people chose the European path 10 years ago at the Maidan Square in Kiev. And let me reiterate the European Council's reaffirmation that EU enlargement is a geostrategic investment in peace, in security, in stability and prosperity in Europe. And this is a strong strategic message from the EU. And thank you also, Krišjānis, for Latvia's strong support for Sweden's accession to NATO. Sweden is fully ready to become an ally. Credibility, reliability and solidarity will be our guiding principles. And at the core of this solidarity-based alliance policy will be our determined commitment to the collective defense of all the allies. And let me also express my sincere gratitude to your and Latvia's excellent coordination of the Nordic and the Baltic cooperation, the format of MB8, during this past year. We, the Nordic and Baltic foreign ministers, have had fruitful meetings. We have traveled together, taking every opportunity to address Russia's brutal aggression on Ukraine and attack on international law and the principles that are the foundation of the European Security Order. In January, Sweden assumes the coordination of the MB8, and the Nordic and the Baltic countries have strong geographical, historical, social, economic and cultural ties. We are strong democracies, sharing interests, sharing values, and in many ways our integration is unparalleled in the world. And taken together, the size of our economies would qualify not only for the G20, but also for the G10. And we contribute to security beyond our own region. For the Swedish government and for myself, deepening ties in the Nordic-Baltic region is a key priority. Our cooperation is central to tackle current challenges. And now I would like to present our three main priorities for the MB8 cooperation next year. I will do so in Swedish. Under vårt ordförandeskap i det nordisk-baltiska samarbetet i MB8 så kommer vi särskilt att prioritera för det första att stärka det nordisk-baltiska säkerhetspolitiska samarbetet. Rysslands anfallskrig, aggressionskrig mot Ukraina, liksom Finlands NATO-medlemskap och Sveriges kommande anslutning till NATO har förändrat den strategiska situationen i vår region. Med undantag för Ryssland så kommer norra Europa att bestå av NATO-allierade med en gemensam agenda. Och vi, de nordiska och baltiska länderna i MB8, behöver fördjupa vår dialog om hur vi bäst stärker säkerheten och stabiliteten i regionen. För det andra, vi kommer att stå fast vid vårt orubbliga stöd för Ukrainas rätt till frihet, suveränitet och territoriell integritet. Vi MB8-länder är fast beslutna att tillsammans fortsätta stödja Ukraina politiskt, ekonomiskt, militärt för att säkra att Ukraina vinner kriget och kan försvara sig också på lång sikt. Ukrainas återhämtning, uppbyggnad och fortsatta EU-närmande är högt prioriterat. Ukrainas kamp för frihet är också vår kamp och Ukrainas öde är sammanflätat med våra öden. Och slutligen, den tredje punkten, sist. Vi ska också säkra det fortsatta globala stödet för Ukraina. Vi MB8-länder har en unik regional plattform. Och med den som grund fortsätter vårt arbete för att bibehålla det globala stödet för Ukraina. Genom gemensamma diplomatiska ansträngningar och resor ska vi utveckla vår globala partnerskap och understryka att en rättvis, omfattande och varaktig fred i Ukraina baserat på FN-stadgans principer ligger i allas våra intressen. So I look forward very much continuing working with you, Krišjānis, and our Nordic and Baltic colleagues on all these pressing issues, and together we can have a true impact. And now I leave the floor to you. Once again, very much welcome to Sweden and to Stockholm.
So, tack så mycket, Tobias, for everything. Wonderful discussion, and it's always a pleasure when like-minded countries, when we work together, the discussions with you, it's as if we are coming from almost the same government, which is extremely important to note. So, war has returned to Europe. Russia is fighting now for almost 2 years. In February it will be 2 years, a brutal, genocidal, imperialistic war against Ukraine, trying to obliterate it as a country. And we in Europe have a united response, which is complete and unwavering support. What's extremely important is that in this war, Ukraine wins and Russia loses, because Russia is challenging the very basic fundamentals of how our society is organized around the rule of law. And Russia is trying to replace that with the rule of force, where a larger neighbor can do as they please to a smaller neighbor. And combined efforts from all of us, this is what will prevail. Regarding cooperation between our countries, so we cooperate on many levels simultaneously. Very important is the MB8 format that you will now be taking over in January as the chairmanship. We have the European Union, and Latvia is in strong anticipation of the final ratification in Turkey and in Hungary, so that you could become the 32nd, and you will become the 32nd NATO member state. In our government, the only challenge to ratifying your application is we wanted to make sure that you actually had formally applied, and that we would ratify after your application and not before, because for us it's been full support from before day one. And speaking about what we as a region need to do, so we need to continue to support Ukraine in all ways. So it's economically or financially, it's militarily, it's humanitarian, it's politically, for them now to join the European Union, a very important message. But we also have to remember that besides Ukraine, besides Russia as an aggressor, there's Belarus. Belarus, whose dictator Lukashenko has basically usurped power. The democratic opposition is essentially in exile, and in supporting the democratic opposition, we have to support those powers in Belarus which do not agree with Lukashenko, which are not, which want Belarus to follow a path more similar to Ukraine's, that is, in becoming fully independent of Russia. So as we focus on supporting Ukraine against the Russian aggression, we have to remember also, and this is what we discussed about our combined efforts to support the Belarusian opposition. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to speak a little bit about the NB8, an extremely important cooperative format. During 2023, my country chaired this process, and with this symbolic handshake, I would like to turn over the chairmanship to you, so you can start in January from a very low start, already in the blocks, and continue the path forward. So, Tobias, thank you very much. Congratulations and good luck.
Oh, thank you, Krišjānis. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will go to questions, and we will start with Radio Sweden.
Hi, thanks. A question for Minister Kariņš. what does the delay to Swedish NATO entry mean for Latvia and the Baltic region specifically? What sort of problems does that pose? And secondly, what sort of contact does Latvia have with Hungary and Turkey, and what are you sort of doing to put pressure on them to ratify Swedish membership?
Right, so I think what needs to be remembered is that right now the ratification process unfortunately seems to have very little to do with Sweden. These appear to be processes outside of the direct influence of the Swedish government, and as a matter of fact for many governments. These are negotiations which are taking place between different NATO partners. So we are in continued anticipation of the final decision being taken. I take opportunity, I took it as a Prime Minister, now as a Foreign Minister, to speak with my counterparts. The Hungarians repeatedly say that they will not be the last to ratify. Okay, but they are still one of the two that have not ratified, so we're waiting for the Hungarian ratification procedure. And of course, importantly, we're also waiting for the ratification process in Turkey. We just heard, Tobias and I, we met recently with the Turkish Foreign Minister, who also repeated again that the ratification process is imminent. That is a question of weeks, not months. But of course, the non-ratification, we see no reason for it. There's no overt reason given. And we certainly hope that it moves forward. From Latvia's point of view, we have no doubt that Sweden will be ratified as the 32nd member state. It's just a question of when.
SVT, Swedish television.
Yes, please. Actually, you asked the question I was going to ask as well. But to you, and then I would like to ask a question to the Swedish minister in Swedish, if it's okay. I was wondering, what does it mean? I mean, when you're planning, all of this is planning, I mean, the coordination between these 8 countries, that Sweden is not yet a member of NATO now, when you're entering 2024, for instance.
Well, the interesting aspect of the MB8 is that until today, we have not been united in any one single club. So prior, some of us have been in NATO, some have not. Some have been in the European Union, some have not. And of those in Europe, some of us are in the Eurozone and some are not. But we have for years had immensely effective cooperation because fundamentally we are actually quite similar societies with quite similar interests. NATO accession is the first time in our history that we will be united under one roof. So the MB8 coordination is not hampered by the decision not yet taken in the Turkish and the Hungarian parliaments, because for years we've been operating extremely effectively, and Finland and Sweden were not a part of NATO. And just as Norway and Iceland are not part of the European Union, or Sweden is not part of the Eurozone with Denmark, although both are in the European Union. So it's the most interesting cooperation, which is not based to date on any one formal membership, but is based profoundly in shared and common interests of our societies and our governments.
Thank you. Tobias Billström, du har ju under det senaste året, under lång tid, kommit med många olika besked om att snart kommer vi få gå med i NATO. Men det har ju visat sig att det har inte stämt några av de budskapen. Vad betyder det egentligen att du så många gånger har sagt att vi snart ska få gå med och vi har inte fått gå med?
Ja, först och främst är det ju ett väldigt tillspetsat sätt att beskriva det på. Snarare är det så att processen varenda gång har rört sig framåt på precis det sättet som vi har beskrivit från regeringens sida att den skulle göra. Från toppmötet i NATO i Madrid förra året fram till och med toppmötet i Vilnius i år i somras, så var det en tydlig och klar väg där det handlade om att implementera, att genomföra det som Madridmötet hade inneburit att Turkiet, Sverige och Finland hade överenskommit om. Och därför blev också toppmötet i Vilnius en stor framgång. Handslaget mellan den turkiska presidenten, den svenska statsministern och NATOs generalsekreterare bekräftade att Sverige hade gjort det som vi hade överenskommit oss om att göra. Och den turkiska presidenten sa också att därefter så skulle papperna skickas till det turkiska parlamentet för att påbörja den här ratificeringsprocessens sista steg i oktober. Och papperna skickades också över i oktober. Så jag skulle snarare säga att vi har tvärtom kunnat se hur vi steg för steg har rört oss framåt precis på det sättet som vi har beskrivit. Nu avvaktar vi det sista steget, det vill säga att ratificeringen också ska genomföras i det turkiska parlamentet. Och precis som min kollega utrikesminister Karins har beskrivit så har det uttalade beskedet varit från den turkiska utrikesministern och hans regeringsvägnar att det här då ska äga rum inom några veckor. Och det beskedet gavs också för någon vecka sedan i Bryssel. Så nu avvaktar vi att detta kommer att ske och vi så att säga utgår från att det beskedet gäller.
Tack. Då tar vi Reuters om det fanns en...
Thank you. If I could ask the Swedish Foreign Minister, Turkey's an ally of President Erdogan was saying that there won't be any NATO accession for Sweden until President Netanyahu is put in front of a criminal court over crimes committed in Gaza. How do you see the war that Israel is fighting there affecting NATO accession?
Well, first of all, it wasn't the president who said so. It was another politician in Turkey. From President Erdogan, there has been a clear connection ever since September between the sale of F-16 to Turkey. That has been a very, very clear message from him. I've also been very clear that the Swedish government is not a party to that sort of sales of defense material. That is something which only concerns the United States, Turkey, and perhaps also Greece when it comes to the sale of F-35, because as President Biden said just prior to the NATO summit in Vilnius, he was trying to put together a consortium consisting of Turkey, Greece and the United States. These deliberations, these negotiations, is something which only concerns these three countries. However, of course, as representative of the Swedish government, I view everything that has a positive effect on the Swedish NATO accession as something which is positive in itself. And we shall see what happens.
Can I just follow up a question? I mean, the process with Turkey has gone on for a very long time now, and Sweden has been forced to change its laws, to agree to much deeper cooperation with Turkey over terrorism, for example. Turkey has accused Sweden of being a sort of hotbed of terrorism and support for activities which they consider as terrorist. What does that say about the future cooperation between Sweden and Turkey when we assume Sweden does become a member of NATO? Can you really cooperate deeply with a country that has accused you of all of these things?
Well, first of all, Sweden has fulfilled everything that we committed ourselves to do at the NATO summit in Madrid. And that was done, broad consent in the Swedish political society, in parliament, but we should do the trilateral memorandum between Turkey, Finland and Sweden in order to gain the status as invitee. And that status was given and we have delivered as the NATO summit in Vilnius also concluded. Long time, well, that is a relative matter. If you look at the processes within NATO, I would say that both Finland and soon Sweden, if and now we are joining, has done so in record speed, which has also been acknowledged by the Secretary General, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg. We view this as a process where we have full support from the member states of NATO. Nobody has spoken out against Swedish NATO membership, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten the status as invitee. And we know that once we join, we will be very welcomed allies. This is not to say that there aren't discussions and deliberations within the NATO family. I think that Latvia can testify to that. But we have a very good cooperation. When it comes to the question of terrorism, it is obvious that that cooperation has increased as a result of the trilateral memorandum between Swedish authorities and Turkish authorities, to the effect that we now saw a Swedish court giving a verdict to a person for being given a sentence of prison for having been involved in PKK activities on the Swedish territory, which is a very good example of the cooperation. We have also been said to our Turkish counterparts that we are interested in following up on this because we have problem with organized crime in our country, and we want to see cooperation with Turkey continuing also after our NATO accession. Thank you.
Thank you, and that will conclude this press conference. Thank you for coming.